This episode of All About the Gear is brought to you by BorrowLenses.com.
In this episode of All About the Gear, Doug K and I sit down in Berkeley, California to talk about his thoughts around the Sony mirrorless camera, the RX1R. We're here in, where are we? We're at TWiP in Berkeley, California. You and I rendezvoused here to geek out, exchange gear, and talk about the Sony RX1R, right? So that guy.
That's it.
So tell me about it. What's your initial overall impressions of that camera?
Before we start, can I explain the conditions under which we're actually doing this show?
Yes.
This is our drop-off point. This is midway between where you live and I live, and
yes.
But we're here on a Sunday and having Bloody Marys with beer chasers.
Yes.
Right? This is just part of it. One of those with one of those, and so I take no personal responsibility for anything that occurs during this show. I will, however, refer to my notes quite frequently.
Excellent.
Anyway, all right. With that out of the way,
Yes.
we are talking about the Sony RX1R, which is an awesome little camera. The RX1 came out, I think, about a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. We're doing this in September of 2013.
Yeah.
The camera is a full-frame mirrorless camera. It has a fixed 35mm f2 lens. You can't remove it. You can't change it. But it is Sony's first full-frame mirrorless camera. It is not cheap. This is a $2,800 camera.
$2,800.
And you can't even change lenses, and you can't even zoom.
Well, let's just talk about that for a minute here. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of the whole limit yourself to expand your creative muscles and all that stuff. Let's just call it $3,000. $3,000 for that camera with those limitations. Some photographers may be saying, why don't I just go buy a DSLR and get started in that space? Why would someone spend the money on that guy when there are perfectly capable DSLRs out there for less money with the lens?
Good question, of course. You probably shouldn't, is the answer. But there are people, the quality of this is extremely high.
Yeah.
So there are people I know who are used to shooting medium format, who are buying this camera because it actually approximates the medium format look.
Yeah.
Hard to imagine, I know, but this is, this is up there in the D800, Nikon D800 range in terms of quality. In some ways, it's better than a D800. We'll talk about that. But my take on it is that ultimately this camera is really Sony's technology exhibition, if you will. They're showing off technology of the future. Yeah. And I think that about a month after we're shooting this, we're going to see a new version of the RX1 with interchangeable lenses. We're pretty sure we're going to see a full-frame Sony NEX camera that's going to use some of this same technology. So the punchline that we'll get to at the end is wait. But I think this really is just a chance for Sony to put a lot of stuff out there and see what floats. And I think they've done a good job with it.
So what about cost? So we talked about it's almost $3,000. So again, if you go in the opposite direction, away from the DSLR, the other camera that might seem like a logical competitor to this guy would be the Fuji X100S.
Yeah, and
right?
the Fuji X100S came out a little before this one, because this is a pretty new camera, after the original RX1. That camera is a crop sensor, but it's less than half the price, and certainly much more than half the quality. Okay. So I think if somebody wants, and it's the same equivalent focal length, so it's a 23mm, I think, on that camera. It's the equivalent of the same 35mm you get on the full frame. Okay. So it's the same field of view, but a slightly smaller sensor. But that camera is like $1,300 as opposed to $2,800.
Okay. So with this one, just sensor size wise, and forgive me if you already answered this, the sensor size of this versus the Fuji, right. APS-C on the Fuji,
Fuji
right?
is APS-C, so a 1.5 crop factor.
Okay.
This is a full frame.
That's a full frame.
This is full frame camera, so this is up there with your big Nikons, your big Canons, and your Leicas. Okay. And in many ways, this is going after the Leica market. it feel here. Take the
Yeah.
you can see that on
I'm
camera.
holding it off
Right.
camera.
It feels like a Leica. It's heavy. It's sturdy. It feels really good. It's not a lightweight
It feels like
camera.
a tank. I mean, it feels like I could drop it and it would be okay.
Yeah, we won't do that.
Yeah, yeah.
But
you could be in the middle, like a war photographer, right? You could be out in the middle of harm's way, and that thing feels like it would be okay.
It is. And I don't think it's particularly weather sealed, except for the fact that the lens isn't removable.
Right.
So it's not, it's not the camera you want to take out in the rain, perhaps.
I've been hearing a lot about the weather sealing, especially when we're shooting this on the OMD, the Olympus OMD. And it's weather sealed, given the proper lenses
up to a point.
Yeah, so you could be out in the rain, it's going to be okay. Essentially, you're not going to go scuba diving with it.
Right.
But up until I got this camera, I hadn't heard much about weather sealing, and I hadn't worried about it that much. Is it just me? Is this just a new thing, a new marketing?
Remember, some of your cameras are pretty well weather sealed. You still have a D700 Nikon?
I do.
That's a pretty sealed up camera.
Yeah,
You put
D700 and my D7000.
Yeah, so you put the right lenses on that. You've got one that if it gets wet, you don't worry about it. You're not going to dunk it in the water.
Right. Maybe that's an effect. Maybe I haven't worried about it because it's just been of course, I'm shooting Nikon. Of course it's going to be, resist the elements because it's Nikon.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to take some of the less expensive cameras and get them wet,
Right, of course.
When I take my big Nikons out and I shoot, out in landscape world, if they get wet, I just don't worry about them. I wipe them off and they keep shooting,
Right.
Anyway, and just a side topic, this is the EM5 you're using, and the EM1 I think actually has better weather seal. So take a look at that.
Excellent. All right, so we talked about the sensor. So on with the sensor. So we talked about sensor size. What about the sensor quality and the images that you get out of that thing? And hopefully you'll give me some that I can show as we're talking about this.
Yeah, I've made a collection of some that we'll put in with the blog post.
Okay.
So it's 24 megapixels, so it's the same sensor size as the Nikon D600 and so forth.
Yeah.
It is superb in low light. It's actually better than the D600. The
like superb in terms of resolving power into the shadows, or focusing, or both.
The real issue with this sensor is the noise. So,
well, that's every sensor.
Right.
It's like the real problem with this car is the gas mileage. Of course,
Other than that,
other than that, it's great. Yeah.
This sensor is really pretty extraordinary. It's the particular thing about it is the very good high ISO characteristics.
Yeah.
When you crank up the ISO on this thing, you get noise like you do on other sensors. But the noise is actually pretty.
You like
it's
the noise.
It's actually good-looking noise.
Yeah.
You don't get the color noise. You don't get that sort of confetti stuff that you sometimes get when you crank up the shadows on some images. What you get is something that looks like grain, like film grain. And it's actually pretty attractive. And because of that, you can easily crank this up to ISO 6400, 8000, 12,000. I mean, it really does a nice job.
Wow.
One of the things that's great is to set this into a preset mode. It has user presets on it, and you can set it to, ISO 8000, black and white, high contrast, and you get this really marvelous, gritty, but still very attractive look to it.
So almost like an Instagram filter.
Oh yeah, it's not that severe. Not that severe, right?
Not that severe.
No one would say it came from Instagram, but it's a great sensor. I really do like it.
Very cool. So you like the sensor on that? It's a good quality. Even at what about low ISO? At high ISOs, you get the grain, but it's an attractive grain. What about
gorgeous? You get great dynamic range out of this. One of the things that, in fact, about the only thing they changed between the RX1 and the RX1R is that they removed the anti-alias filter. Now we've talked about that on the show before.
Yeah.
The anti-alias filter is a little piece of glass that sits in front of the sensor that actually blurs the image a little bit to make sure that diagonal lines don't get little jaggies in the edges of them. And it makes sure that there's no moire problem. So if you shoot something with a repeating pattern, you don't get that sort of colorful pattern effect that we call moire.
Right.
So they took that out for this. It makes the camera a little bit sharper. And it's almost impossible to get the moire.
Right.
I mean, it's really not easy to cause that problem to exist. So I loved it. It was really a very nice sensor. Beautiful, beautiful image. And that's why some of those medium format guys are flocking to this camera because they're getting the kind of quality they
I was
expect.
going to ask you about that. So, in terms of who this camera is for, is this the camera that the photojournalist that normally has a bunch of Nikon or Canon gear, Sony Alpha gear hanging off of them would, okay, now I'm going out to dinner, I'm just going to take my RX1R with me and leave the rest home. Is it that kind of camera,
Yeah.
or is this like a housewife camera? Who's it for? You know?
Well, one of the things about shooting with a camera that just has one lens is that you learn to shoot with just one lens.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about that with the X100S. We talked about that with the Leicas to some extent, even though they're interchangeable. But when you only have one lens, you learn how to do it. So it's a great street camera. I like it better than shooting with the Leicas.
But the Fuji X100S.
The Fuji, it's on the sort of the same par with the Fuji.
Okay.
In terms of the usability.
But
of
$1,000.
twice as much money.
Twice as much, yeah.
And so I like it for that. But it's a good general purpose camera because the 35 millimeter lens on a full frame is very usable in a wide variety of situations. You can do family pictures with this.
Right.
You can do just about everything. You're not going to shoot action.
Yeah.
You're not going to shoot birds or wildlife at a
Sports.
distance.
Yeah.
Sports, you're not going to shoot sports unless you're right up close to the action.
Right.
Then you might.
And that can be
Might get hurt.
dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
If you shoot football, that can be dangerous.
So let's talk a little bit about the controls of the camera.
Yeah.
The controls are, again, the traditional sort of modeled after film camera controls. You have your normal, what we call the PASM dial, P-A-S-M, that's your priority aperture, priority, shutter priority, and manual mode dial. You have exposure compensation right there on the top. You have a button here that's customized, but I think most people probably use this to change the ISO on the fly, but you can program that to bring up almost any function you want. On the lower left on the front, you have your manual focus or autofocus knob, and something that Sony has called DMF. DMF is sort of a manual override to automatic focus. Very nice. And then on the back, you have sort of the typical thing, a menu button, a function button, exposure lock, and the usual controls. Very usable.
How big is the touchscreen on that guy?
The touchscreen on this puppy, that's a good question. I think it's about 3 inches.
And it is a touchscreen.
Oh, no, sorry. It is not a touchscreen.
It's not a touch.
It is not a touch.
Okay.
Now, Sony, as you and I have talked about many times, Sony has maybe the worst menu system in the world. This camera is much better.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that, again, this is something that's giving us a hint of what's to come from Sony in the future. It has a much better menu system. Just 2 levels of menus, not all those silly icons, particularly that they're not touch icons, so what's the point? But if I don't know, we probably can't see it there, but it basically has one set of menus that basically 2 levels. You can scroll through the top level and then dive down on any one of them, and that's it. Very
just
simple.
an X and a Y.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's it.
Now, Doug, on the top of that camera, I'm noticing the exposure compensation dial. And it seems like Sony has given a lot of real estate to exposure compensation on that camera. How do you feel about that? Is that the right thing to do?
For me, it is. And I think that this tells you that this is aimed at a fairly serious photographer, because I think your average consumer wouldn't know what exposure compensation was.
Right.
For those of you who aren't sure, we'll explain it, which is that if you let the camera make the metering decision for you, you may decide to override it. You may say, well, the camera's not recognizing that it's a backlit scene, so I want to increase the exposure. Or I really want the silhouette effect, so I'm going to decrease the exposure. That's what exposure compensation does.
Sure.
And like you say, it's very prominent here. You can just go right to it.
Yeah, like with your thumb, you're going to just roll around there.
And of course, you can see there, it's labeled on the top, but it's also visible through a viewfinder. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
It tells you that the camera is for the serious photographer.
Okay.
And why would anybody spend $2,800 for this if they're not a serious photographer?
Absolutely.
And can't appreciate
Well,
it.
let's talk about that viewfinder. So
Okay.
I noticed that there is no electronic, like on my OMD that we're shooting this with, I've got an electronic viewfinder in there, which I love.
Right.
This guy, more expensive than my
not
OMD,
there.
doesn't have one.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
Well, yeah, what's up with that? It's it doesn't have one.
That's what's up with that?
And one of the reasons is that the camera's pretty packed, and there isn't physically room in this body to have a full frame sensor, which is obviously larger, takes up more space internally, and a viewfinder. So
that's just apologetics.
You can buy one of these little puppies.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's $479 for this little electronic viewfinder.
Wow.
Which
that thing is $479. So that pushes $2,800 for the body.
I have cameras that cost less than this viewfinder.
$2,800 for the body. And how much for that?
$479. I don't even do the math.
$479.
Right?
So we're looking at 33,
almost $3,300.
$3,300, yeah.
So this little puppy just slides in, and you have an electronic viewfinder.
Yes.
And you can do this with it. You can look straight down.
Yeah.
Or you can look straight out. And it works.
Which, as we'll find with the Panasonic GX7, it has a built-in EVF that flips up so that you can do that. And it comes with the camera.
That's right. None of this $479 extra.
So one of the reviews that we're going to be doing in the future is the Panasonic GX7, which has a built-in articulated kind of viewfinder that pops up for waist-level shooting like that comes with the camera. What's up with that?
Yeah, what's up with that? I don't know. It tells you something about this camera, though. If Sony's going to charge $479 for a viewfinder, and they're going to charge you $180 for a lens shade that most lenses come with.
Yeah.
What's the message they're sending with this camera? The message I think they're sending is that this is an experiment. Or that they're testing the waters.
Or if Leica can do it, I can do it too.
You know, they don't quite have the Leica buzz, do they? They don't have the panache that you get with Leica.
Right.
I mean, it's just Sony, right?
Right. But Sony's coming on strong. I mean, as we've talked about, there is some interesting, amazing things that Sony's come out to date, and if the rumors are even half true of what they're coming out with in 2013, 2014, beyond if the last parts, could be interesting. So that Leica panache may be fading for Sony practicality.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, if they come out with an NEX full-frame camera that costs as much as this and has a $180 lens shade and a $479 viewfinder, it's not going to work.
Right.
So we'll see how it goes. But
so you like the EVF? And why?
It's okay.
But you know,
okay.
like we were talking about before we started recording, as I shoot with these mirrorless cameras, even this OMD here, I don't find myself using the electronic viewfinder that much. I like the big LCD and composing on that. It's refreshing to get my shot composed and know exactly or relatively close to what the exposure is going to look like on this big LCD before I take the picture. And I find myself, why do I want to look through this little tiny squinty LCD? What's that for?
You have good vision, don't you?
I have very good vision.
So you can sit here and go like this and do this.
Yeah.
I wear bifocals. And that means I basically have to go like this to work with the back of the camera. And if you see somebody going like this with their head tipped back, that's a clue they're bifocal wearers.
Got it. Got it.
For me, I need to look through something for the most part. Now, having said that, there are exceptions. I love cameras that have an articulating rear display.
Yeah.
Because I love being able to shoot at waist level, holding it down and looking down on the camera. I also love shooting way up high and tipping it down.
Do that all the
getting
time.
Up above the crowd. This camera does not have an articulating LCD on the back. I wish it did. It's one of the weaknesses.
Yep.
I don't know why it doesn't. It might be, again, because that adds thickness. It might be because that's a little bit of a flimsier camera, and this is a very solid camera.
It is.
And they didn't want to make it flimsy.
Yeah.
But I do miss the articulating screen.
Yeah. But in defense of articulated screen cameras like the OMD and the Sony, what was that? The NEX5R that I have, both have articulated screens and both feel really solid.
Right. But the NEX6 and 7 have both an articulating screen and a viewfinder.
Right.
And so why not have both?
Right.
And I think for me personally, that's the solution. I want an LCD that's good. I want it to articulate, and I want to look through viewfinder.
Yeah.
And that's available. I shouldn't have to ask for that.
Yeah.
So the electronic viewfinder is not terrific. It's a very small angle of view. I find it's very narrow, very small. I wish it were a little bigger, but it's effective.
Yeah.
It does have focus peaking, which is critical these days in an electronic viewfinder.
Yep.
That's a really important thing.
Okay.
So, so it's good. It's bright. It's got focus peaking now.
Would you, well, aside from needing to have it for visual reasons, in your vision, whatever, what about if you don't have vision problems like me? If I was to buy this camera, are there any reasons for me to buy the electronic viewfinder?
No, if you're comfortable without it, save the $479.
Yeah.
And of course, how do you know? Well, if you shoot with your smartphone and you're comfortable with that, it's the same experience, right?
Or if you don't have to hold the camera out to the arm's length in order to see the screen.
Right.
Yeah, I'm poking fun at my dad right now.
Yeah. I know exactly what that's like.
Okay, so let's talk about the lens issues here with the fact that it's got the fixed lens on that. So we talked about a little bit, sort of the idea that constraining yourself makes you more creative and forces you to think out of the box and zoom with your feet and all that. Are you happy with that on this camera, or is it, like you said before, does it feel more like an experiment?
No, I think again, for the mission for which this camera was designed, it's a great camera, and I can go out shooting for a day of walk around shooting, and have no problem with this. You find that you think in terms of the focal length of the camera, and you don't look at something that's a quarter mile away and try to shoot it.
Sure. So it's like your eyes, right? You don't assume your eyes can zoom on stuff. If you want to see it better, you get closer to it.
Yeah, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
That's right. And you get used to it, and it once you accept that, it's actually very helpful for your photography because you're starting to look at things in a different way.
Right.
And I think that's really a good exercise.
What about the metering and the autofocus of that guy? A lot of weight has been put lately, especially with these mirrorless cameras, on autofocusing speed, low light performance, accuracy of the meter, all that kind of stuff. Does this camera stand up in that department?
The metering is very good. I was very impressed with how well it did at interpreting a scene and making a pretty good guess about what I wanted. Autofocus, it's interesting. They say, same thing. The autofocus is contrast only. It doesn't have what we call phase detection autofocus, but it's quite good. And it's optimized for the lens, so autofocus is fast. It's not accurate in low light, which is a problem with contrast phase detection.
Right.
But that's true for any camera, any mirrorless camera, most of the mirrorless cameras. So again, it's well matched. It's good enough for autofocus for what this camera does. As we said, you're not going to shoot sports with it anyway, so that's not an issue.
And the
metering is really very good.
It's great.
Really,
it does, and that's becoming a standard, right? Of course, it needs to do all the different spots, center weighted, matrix, all that stuff. So it does the job. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it does. And the Sony has their intelligent auto mode, which is very good, remarkably good at figuring things out.
It's amazing. Yeah, and it's on the NEX5R that I have as well, and it's just, I almost always want to shoot that mode, because it's smarter than I am.
It's right. It's sort of scary.
It is. It is very scary.
And the exposure compensation is there if you need it. It's right there.
Got it.
The specifications say that it's optically stabilized. It has image stabilization.
Oh.
I tried to test that. I could not see the effect of that. So
you can't turn it off?
No, can't turn it off, which maybe that's a giveaway.
Right.
But the spec says optically stabilized, so we'll see.
Okay. What about competition for this guy? Who as you look, you're standing in the camera store or you're browsing B&H, who would you say are the guys that you want to compare this to? Who's the competition?
Well, we've mentioned some of them already. Yeah. One is the Fuji X100S. And I'd be hard pressed to recommend this to anybody over the X100S. As much as I like this camera, the X100S is such an amazing camera for less than half the price.
Yeah.
And what are you giving up? You're really only giving up the full frame sensor that you get out of this, and I don't think that counts for much, personally. Okay.
The Leica, which Leica is?
Well, the Leica, the current. That's interesting. There are some Leicas. I can't remember the model numbers now, but there are some fixed frame Leicas that are low end.
The expensive one, right?
Yeah, well, not the real expensive ones, but
they're all the real expensive.
Yeah, all real expensive. But this is definitely going after the Leica market, the serious, market for these small cameras.
Yeah.
But the other is really the Sony NEX bodies. The 5, the 6, the 7, mostly the 6 and 7. Where the big advantage there is the interchangeable lenses.
Yeah.
And if, I doubt that too many people want this as their only camera. It'd make a great second camera if you have more options from interchangeable lenses.
Yeah.
If you're only going to get one camera and you want to serve a lot of missions, I think you need an interchangeable lens camera, either a Micro Four Thirds, a Fuji, or a Sony NEX camera. I think that's really where you should probably go. But you know, if you put the Leica M240, what they call now the M, and you put a 35mm f2 on there, it's this camera.
It's that camera.
It's just, again, more than twice as much. So
interesting. That's such an exciting space right now for all these
crazy.
cameras. It's just insane.
We were talking while we were drinking our lunch that, you know, shows that we did 2 years ago were all about Nikon and Canon.
Yep.
And now with Micro Four Thirds and other mirrorless technologies, I mean, we have trouble talking about those SLR cameras.
Yeah.
You know, the whole.
They're not innovating. They're not doing anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm gonna tackle the 70D, the Canon 70D.
Yeah.
Because it's got some interesting technology.
Yeah.
But there's not much happening in that world. It's all these little guys.
It's those little guys, and I would argue that we used to only talk about Nikon, Canon, and now Sony's in that triad, right? With the Alpha 99 and those monster cameras that they're making. And I feel like those are like, I don't know, I mentioned Iron Man on an interview I did with Vivian Goutswa a while back, but those cameras kind of remind me of the Iron Man suit that was hidden away. It was hidden away and no one knew about them, and now it's out, you know, and people are kind of finding out all the superpowers that Sony has, right? So it's crazy.
For some reason, they're getting more traction in the press with the mirrorless than they are with the big Alpha cameras.
Yeah.
You know,
because that's where all the buzz is right now.
Yeah. I mean, the Alpha 99 is like one of those best kept secrets.
It is. Unfortunately, I blame that on marketing. You know, it should not. A camera company or electronics company should not have a best kept secret.
That's right.
Okay, so what about this guy? Back to the RX1R. What about the weaknesses of this thing? What are the negatives aside from what we've talked about?
Yeah, I think there's not. We've covered most of them. The fact that the electronic viewfinder isn't built in, and costs $479. That's something right there.
Yes.
The $180 lens hood, I don't have one. Notice.
Yeah. Right.
If it had interchangeable lenses, though, it could be the camera. This with interchangeable lenses, I would actually probably buy.
Really?
Yeah, it's that good in terms of quality. Articulating LCD, we talked about that.
Right.
And then a couple of little things. You spend this much money for a camera, no battery charger.
That just drives me up the wall.
What's with that?
I don't know what.
I mean, you got to plug in the USB cable and charge it in the camera. Fine if you only have one battery.
Right.
But if you got two batteries, that means you can only charge it. You can't shoot with it while you're charging. So you can buy a battery charger, but
for less than $30 on Amazon, you can get a charger. I don't understand
why they don't include that. I don't know. And the battery life, like a lot of these smaller mirrorless cameras, the battery life is pretty bad. I shot for maybe 3 hours and drained the battery completely.
Which means you need multiple batteries, and it goes all the way back to that charger.
That's right. And you know, I have no problem. The batteries are not expensive. I can load my pockets with batteries. They're little, but that's a weakness. I'd rather have them not fix that. I'd rather not have a bigger, heavier camera.
Sure.
I'd rather just have extra batteries.
Extra batteries. They're cheap.
Give me the charger.
Yeah. Extra batteries. You know, have a different SKU with a charger, a lens hood, and extra batteries in there for $150 more.
Yeah.
You know, come on. All right.
So that's it. So
bottom line, what's the bottom line of this guy? Should I run out and buy one? Should I rent one and play with it? Or should I hold off and wait for Sony to do something else?
Well, of course, you should always go to borrowlenses.com and rent one.
Yes.
Because there are friends who help us put this show together, and they provided us with this camera.
So people could actually rent
they can
that
get
camera.
This, right. In fact,
that very camera.
Right. I will etch my name in the back of the LCD so they can have the Doug K signed edition. Right?
If there's anything wrong with it, they can blame it on you.
Right. Oh, you know, playing with it, by the way, I'm sitting here fondling the lens.
Yes.
It's a marvelous macro camera. It has two modes, normal and macro, and it does a great job in macro. So who should buy this? Sitting here at the end of September in 2013, I would say nobody, because it's about to be replaced by something. We don't know exactly what.
Right.
If it weren't about to be replaced with something better, or we hope better, I would say this is an excellent second camera for a serious shooter with a DSLR or medium format camera, who wants to spend more than twice the money than they'd spend on an X100S to get a little better quality.
So that's the camera that, as you're at the New York gallery opening, you'll see Annie Leibovitz walking around with that hanging off her shoulder.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. If you walk around with a Leica,
Yeah.
there are people who know what Leicas are, and they will stop you and say, "Oh, nice camera."
Right.
That happened to me. I was shooting on the Berkeley campus a couple of weeks ago with a Leica, and 2 people came up and said, "Nice camera." No one knows what an RX1R is. You're not going to get that.
Right. But those people that said nice camera have no idea what level photographer you are, right?
That's right.
So you have no idea how to use it.
That's right.
But hey, nice camera.
Yeah. Well, you're getting a nice Ferrari.
Yeah.
Oh, do you know how to drive it?
No,
Yeah.
I don't have my license yet, but I got a nice Ferrari.
So, hold off. I love the camera. I love the technology. I love the quality, and I really look forward to seeing some of this technology and this quality in future Sony cameras that hopefully we'll be able to get our hands on very soon.
Perfect. All right, Doug. Well, thank you. Any final thoughts that you'd like to pass on to the All About the Gear listeners,
That's
watchers?
it, except please send us your comments. You can put the comments on the YouTube page.
Yeah.
You can go to the This Week in Photo blog page and put comments there. You can go to Frederick's post on Google Plus and put them. There's lots of ways to get in touch with us.
Yes.
And by all means, send us your requests and suggestions for future shows. We're always looking to know what you want to see in future reviews, and we'll get a hold of it and we'll tell you what it's like to shoot with it.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Frederick.
Yeah. All right. I hope you enjoyed that review and the conversation Doug and I had about the Sony RX1R. If you did like this video, please go ahead and give us a like on the YouTube video. Also, subscribe to the channel so you can be notified when we release new episodes. And also the blog post over on thisweekinphoto.com. These episodes are being embedded there. That's it for this episode of All About the Gear. We'll see you in the next one.